Good afternoon and welcome to Have We Got Planning News for You. Thank you very much indeed for joining us again. Welcome to our YouTube viewers. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already to get all our updates. Can I give you my usual reminder, as always, to consider making a charity donation in place of a registration fee. Regular viewers will know by now that our supported charities are the combined charities NHS, Just Giving Page and Shelter. But as always, we're very happy for you to donate to a charity of your choice if you prefer. Now, our special guest this week was once again going to be the utterly awesome George Clarke, whom we're extremely fond of. But you might have noticed that either George has changed his appearance quite a lot or he's not here. He's had to put out, once again, for entirely good reasons, the rotters at Channel 4 changed his film schedule yesterday at very short notice. And so he's otherwise engaged today in his day job, which is fair enough. Step forward. Mark Southgate as the guest today. Now, Mark works with George as the CEO of George's brilliant Ministry of Education, Innovation and Education, MOBIE for short. And MOBIE carries out research and development into 21st century homes, including modern methods of construction, working with young people to provide them with educational opportunities and courses, giving new routes to architecture and the built environment, just like George. So we're very, very pleased to have you here, Mark. And you're a bit of a planning and development renaissance man, because as well as all of that, you were head of national infrastructure projects at PINS, were you not, until 2018, and before that, head of planning at the Environment Agency?
I was indeed, and before that, head of planning at the RSPB. So quite an interesting planning career.
Is there anything you haven't done? Is there anything you haven't done? Or
I'm sure there's some things I can yet do.
Well, welcome. We're really grateful for joining us. Perhaps you can tell us, as I ask everybody, apart from the Archbishop, where are you calling from and what are you drinking?
Okay, so I'm calling from Stroud in deepest Gloucestershire. I am drinking this, which is actually a Stroud brewery brew, if you can see that. So a very good local brewer, organic and certified B Corporation. So it's the way we tend to do things down here. Stroud's very sort of green and
it's by one of my favourite places in the country to do an inquiry. They've got a love the council officers by the mill. Absolutely lovely.
Ebbly Mill, yeah, very good place.
I like to stay at the Bear of Rodborough on the Rodborough Common on top.
Yep.
Pub / hotel, great for running around there. So if anyone wants to instruct me in a case in Stroud, special rates. Now, please don't forget to post questions for Mark in the Q&A function. It's my turn to be selecting at least one of the audience questions during the interview. If we have time, we'll of course do more than one. And please keep the banter up. Someone's already asked, has Chris found any meteorites in his back garden? I think the Cheltenham meteors were actually just Chris with his fireworks again. That's what Paul, Mary and I think, at least. And I should have said Sasha's late again. He's mid cross-examination, I think, but he is going to be joining us in due course. In the meantime, let's introduce the rest of the panel. Mary, once again, your wonderful artwork sitting behind you. So you're at home, and how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Mary Cook from Town Legal. I'm back on the gin. I've ditched the water, and I'm on the Plymouth gin.
Good on you.
And it's delightful to see you, Mark. Thank you very much for stepping in to our show. Push over, George. Make room for Mark.
And the poor man's George Clarke's older, greyer, and definitely much more southern.
I'm perfectly happy with Mark Southgate. Thank you.
That's an endorsement.
Paul, you're going to have to explain the background. I'm a bit slow on the uptake here.
Well, the theme was said to be, because it's Stroud, it should be lawnmowers.
Yep.
And being in the northwest of England, as you will know, Charlie, from your many visits, we have the National Lawnmower Museum in Southport. And the most brilliant piece of advice I've ever read is the trip advisor for the most recent one for the National Lawnmower Museum. I can't even say it. Which says, only good if you love lawnmowers. Worst 3 seconds of my life. But if you love lawnmowers, then this is the place to visit. They range from old to new. Not somewhere to take your date, unless they also love lawnmowers. Excellent advice.
Anybody would help explain the lawnmower theme.
The well-known story, which I won't go into live on air, about a QC in a lawnmower and an attempted murder, but which you may or may not know, but it's worth a Google if not. Chris, how are you?
Well, I'm very well, Charlie. I think we should explain the lawnmower theme, Mark.
Explain that, perhaps. So on my Stroud bottle, it's called Budding, this ale. And budding is the name of, and not a lot of people know this, the lawnmower was invented in Stroud. And it was a guy called Edwin Budding. He worked in the mills down here, and he found out that the machine they used to take the nap off the cloth, rotary machine, he suddenly thought, well, what if we applied that to cutting grass? And basically, so Stroud, and in fact, just down the road, Brimscombe is where the lawnmower was invented. So actually, Lancashire is coming in on our territory down here, I think.
I was too polite to ask. I just thought Paul had an inexplicable love of lawnmowers, like he does of costume. But...
Can I also just add, Charlie? You didn't just to add what I'm drinking. I'm actually drinking something from the Bristol beer factory called Southwell Hop, and the reason I'm doing that is I've been to Bargain Booze, I've been to Asda, I've been to Waitrose, searching through every possible bottle of beer to find anything from Gloucestershire. There is a dearth of Gloucestershire beers in Lancashire.
You're going to be banned. You're going to be banned from your local supermarket if you keep behaving like that.
I already have.
I imagine that is not a problem that you've had in Cheltenham.
No, as it happens, it is no problem at all. So, yes, I'm at home. I had the fastest ever case management conference today with Harold Stevens. It was great. It took 30 minutes. That was it. He didn't want to be there. But it was very expeditiously handled, I think is what I was meaning to say.
Yes,
and,
quite.
And what I understood the theme to be was lawnmowers. So I can reveal now that I have been attacked by a lawnmower. I have gone to the lengths of getting one of these. And as you know, I'm teetotal at the moment for Lent, which is really tough. So I am drinking water, but not so Presumption, because Presumption is taking up the theme and he is drinking cider. And why is he drinking cider? Because Stroud is home to Laurie Lee, and Laurie Lee wrote Cider with Rosie. Bit of straw out of his hair there. He's been rolling around with Rosie and drinking Dunkertons. And if you don't know who Dunkerton is, Dunkerton is Mr. Superdry, and he's the Don Corleone of Cheltenham, who's now renovating all the listed buildings, and he's doing a fantastic job and making fantastic improvements to the town, and this is his cider.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I didn't get the memo about lawnmowers or indeed Gloucestershire, because I could only join your prep session for five minutes yesterday.
All the memo about haircuts.
All the memo, boom, boom, below the belt. Ouch. So I was actually going to bring in some Atom beer. My very good friend John Edmund, who lives in Beverley, what the greatest place on earth. He mentioned to me that there's a brewery in Hull, which has an outlet in East Riding of Yorkshire in Beverley, called Atom Brewery, and I ordered a whole stash of those, and then I left them at home this morning. And I did contemplate asking my wife to put a couple of cans of beer in a taxi and getting the cab round to Chambers, but I thought that might look a little bit weird. So I have instead gone to my local stage. We've got a rather nice blood orange and cranberry sour beer, which actually is what I need to wake myself up today after I've been feeling a little bit tired this afternoon. It tastes nicer than it sounds, it must be said. Anyway, we need to crack on. Sasha isn't with us, so we were going to deal with his the decision he's going to cover first, but I'll do mine first in the hope that Sasha might be able to join us a little bit later. I'm going to talk about the case called Leech Homes and Northumberland County Council. It was a decision of the Court of Appeal arising out of the relatively unusual and arcane context of what's known as an application for a certificate of alternative appropriate development in the context of a dispute about compensation for compulsory purchase. And an application for one of these certificates enables the owner of compulsorily acquired land to establish what would have been the planning permission in relation to land in the so-called no scheme world, and that in turn informs the level of compensation they're due. So that was the context. The application was made by Leech Homes to the LPA, and an appeal against its refusal was dismissed by the upper tribunal, from where Leech appealed to the Court of Appeal, and this is the Court of Appeal's judgment. Now, the central issue, which is of wider importance beyond that relatively arcane context, was whether the site was to be treated for the purposes of determining the application as having been in the green belt as of the valuation date. And that in turn depended on a short but important point about the interpretation of development plan policy relating to the green belt. And it's that has wider implications. So policy S5 of the 2005 Northumberland County and National Park Structure Plan an old-style structure plan, had proposed an extension to the greenbelt, and it described that area of the extension in general terms, noting that, quote, precise boundaries should be defined in local plans. So it established the principle, boundaries to follow. And the upper tribunal had held that until the boundaries were fixed in the local plans, which hadn't happened as of the valuation date, and this is their words, it would preempt the plan-making process to proceed on the basis that the greenbelt policies didn't apply to the site. And therefore, they said the only safe assumption is, in the absence of some good reason for concluding the site isn't within the greenbelt, is that it is greenbelt land. That despite the fact the boundaries were yet to be determined. And Lord Justice Lewison, who gave the main judgment in the Court of Appeal, upheld that approach. And what he said is the upper tribunal rightly recognised that policy S5 was in operation and effectively extended the greenbelt. And then he said they'd rightly got on to exercise a planning judgment as to whether there was a sufficient reason for not applying the greenbelt policy in advance of the boundaries being fixed. It seems that the sufficient reason would have been where the boundaries, when drawn, plainly wouldn't include the land in question. It was a sort of non-starter for the extension, therefore it wouldn't prejudice the local plan process to treat it as non-greenbelt now. Now, greenbelt extension is obviously rare, but it's an important outline of the approach to be taken when they are done on those rare occasions in a strategic plan, such as what would now be a Part 1 local plan, with the precise boundaries being left to a later Part 2 plan. And the judgment confirms that the extended greenbelt coverage will ordinarily apply in general terms from the Part 1, the strategic plan, even if the detail is to be worked out in a later plan. And you might be thinking in your heads, well, does this apply the other way around to greenbelt release? Because quite often though you see Part 1 local plans releasing greenbelt subject to detailed boundaries in Part 2. I mean, the Waverley local plan is one example I'm aware of that. Probably not is my answer, because treating land as released before the definition, before the precise locations are defined, would cause similar prejudice to the prejudice the Court of Appeal thought was persuasive here. So it probably doesn't work the way around. Now, finally, I can't leave the issue of greenbelt without mentioning in passing the very significant decision of the Secretary of State yesterday, allowing an appeal by CEG following a High Court quashing of his original dismissal for 500 homes in the Greenbelt in a place called Burley in Wharfdale in Bradford's administrative area. The Secretary of State, having found Bradford's housing supply was less than the 2.06 years it claimed, went on to go and say this: the proposal would deliver a substantial number of homes, which attracts very substantial weight given the poor housing supply situation. It would provide a site for a new primary school, which attracts great weight. There would be net benefits for biodiversity, which gets significant weight, and heritage, which attracts very significant weight, economic benefits, new recreational facilities, and minimise the need to build in greater areas of flood risk or carry a moderate rate. For these reasons, there are very special circumstances. Now, that's a striking departure from the textbook approach to greenbelt in appeal decisions of recent years, and certainly the last 12 or so months. By our reckoning, there are only 2 Secretary of State appeal decisions in 2020 that allowed appeals for greenbelt development, that included housing: Paul's Seashell Trust case and Chris's Oxford Brookes case, both of which were truly one-offs, because the Seashell Trust was an enabling development for a special needs school, and the Oxford Brookes case involved demolishing a tower that had a highly deleterious effect on the greenbelt on a PDL site that was emerging allocation. This latest Burley decision is different because none of the factors that cumulatively contributed to VSC were of the same uniqueness. And that does give some cause for optimism for those who are concerned that previous approaches to greenbelt development were overly restrictive. So it'll be interesting to see if that pattern is continued. So that's greenbelt. Charlie. Yes.
Secretary of State issued that decision yesterday, whilst at the same time the Prime Minister said this in the Houses of Parliament: "We will protect our vital greenbelt, which I think constitutes 12.4% of our land. We can build our homes, as my honourable friend rightly suggests, 300,000 of them on brownfield sites across the country," whilst releasing that site.
Nothing like a bit of joined up government, eh? Now, we don't yet have Sasha, so buried in cross-examination. So I'm going to go to you, Paul, and you're going to tell us about another rather unusual case involving Cheshire East.
It's all happening. It's a greenbelt case, and it's certainly not a case of the type we've covered so far, but it's nonetheless quite important. And it's great because it's a case that involves some purple prose that I'm going to quote. So it's a case of Mr. Justice Turner, decided on the 16th of February 2021. And if you look very carefully, you can see what the case is about without reading beyond the names. And you don't often get that. So it's a case brought by Cheshire East against Mr. Maloney and his family. And then if you look down to number 6, it says also persons unknown depositing hardcore, bringing caravans and residentially occupying the land on the south side of Broad Oak Lane, Moberley, Knutsford, Cheshire. That's the greatest title for any case I think I've ever encountered. That tells you what the case is about, which is a family of Irish travellers who in the summer of last year started to move caravans onto a rural part of the world just west of Moberley. For those that know the Northwest, Moberley is in the heart of the footballers' belt, which is an even higher designation than the greenbelt locally, if anybody's aware, because it means that you end up with well-financed objectors as well as policy objections to you. I think it's actually in the Cheshire East local plan. But there was a culmination of litigation. There's a whole series of different campaign groups. But the start of litigation happened in August 2020 when this happened. You've just seen it on the screen of caravans being moved onto this little rural lane. There was an ex parte injunction. That means an injunction sought without telling the other side what that they were going to court, saying, "Can you please stop that?" That was granted by Mr. Justice Forby in August, on 13th of August. And then when you have an ex parte injunction, you're meant to follow it as soon as possible with an inter partes injunction, so the other side get the opportunity to explain why they're breaching plan control. Well, that happened on the 1st of September 2020, and the High Court judge then said, my colleague got it absolutely right and will carry on the injunction. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, things didn't continue in terms of people moving the caravans off, but instead more and more engineering works happened, more and more hardcore came on, and it was all identified as essentially being down at the door of Mr. Maloney and his extended family who'd moved onto the site, and this is the sort of thing that you can see that was happening. And so there was an application then made by Cheshire East to commit for contempt of the two court orders Mr. Maloney for breaching those orders, and also an application to extend the injunction and make it a permanent injunction. First piece of purple prose is this, and it's joyous, telling you exactly how the locals thought of it. It says this: Mr. Maloney set about gradually populating the site with his extended family members, many of whom now live in a total of 13 caravans which have been brought onto the site in quick succession. The word disappointment does not fully reflect the strength of local antipathy to this development. So what happened then was that the case came before Mr. Justice Turner, who had two things to consider: contempt and also extending the injunction. The contempt issue, the law on that is beautifully set out. I'm not going to recite it because it's beautifully set out by Mr. Justice Turner, but he essentially says it's the criminal standard, it's beyond reasonable doubt. And he also set out the principles upon which you would extend an injunction. Well, Mr. Maloney had a whole series of different counts on the indictment, as we'd say in the criminal field, and he was found guilty of 14 of them. That's 14 different breaches that he was found guilty of, for which he will be sentenced in due course. But you'll be pleased to know he was found not guilty, not in contempt, for introducing 2 sheds and replacing one of the caravans. So that was some consolation. More importantly, his lordship ordered that the injunction should carry on indefinitely. So it's a permanent injunction. And I'm delighted to say at the very end, he says, "I'm satisfied, notwithstanding the factors of allowing all 13 caravans to stay in the interim, by a strong balance, the position before Mr. Maloney embarked on his campaign of contumely should be preserved, and not that which prevailed in a time when the matter came before Mr. Justice Cotterill." I had no idea what the word contumely behaviour is. I had to look up contumely behaviour. I've been sent down a rabbit hole of Anglo-Saxon, and it means insulting and offensive behaviour. That's probably the harshest language I've ever written, a High Court judgment. And I'm going to use the word contumely in as many different pleadings as I possibly can from here on. It's given me the way forward. So it's an interesting case. It's site-specific, but it does usefully set out the law on contempt. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Paul. I borrowed that word myself. Never heard of it either. So there you go. You learn something every day. And Chris, given that you know far more than us, including number of Henry VIII's wives and all that sort of thing, yeah, I'm sure you know all about contumely. And you're going to tell us also about the Open Spaces Society's recent case in front of Mrs. Justice Natalie Leven.
I did, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But Paul, by the way, I slipped that into the closing submissions and St Modwin. I'm surprised you didn't notice.
Page 98.
yeah. 10-hour reading. Okay, now I'm going to take you away to the Cotswold Hills and the lovely Rollright villages, which are close to the Rollright Stones in Oxfordshire. This is a story about a footpath. And Rollright footpath number 7, as it happens. This is a decision of the Court of Appeal. If we bring up the first page, there you can see the Open Spaces Society with the appellant, and they had challenged a decision of the Secretary of State for Environment in terms of a footpath diversion order. And the decision got to the Court of Appeal. But the facts of the case are these. An application was made to divert a 228-metre section of footpath away from a listed building. And the owners of the listed building, Manor Farm, had built a wall to separate the garden from the definitive line of the path back in 2007. Unfortunately, they built it in the wrong place. And by building the wall, they managed to enclose the footpath within their own garden. And it turns out the garden path, the gateway, a brick-built greenhouse, a high retaining wall, a garden feature, were all constructed over the definitive line of the footpath. Now, the new owners bought the property in 2015, and the new owners obviously wanted to maintain their privacy despite this unfortunate error. So the potential loss of privacy was there, and no doubt a concern. The landowners who bought the property in 2015 were Prudence MacLeod and her husband. And Prudence, if you don't know, is Rupert Murdoch's daughter. So privacy is important here. If somebody put a footpath through my garden, I'd be pretty hacked off. And plainly, they are entitled to their privacy like anybody else. Now, the inspector noted the family had, and I quote, a high media profile and a subject to press interest, presumably papers owned by others. And the concerns are expressed over their privacy. And this was the basis the order was made, in fact, on the basis of privacy. Now, the Open Spaces Society opposed the order at the hearing in front of the inspector. I think we've got the decision there. Yeah, the order decision. The inspector was K.R. Sarwood. And as you can see, it was on the 15th of October 2019. Now, the Open Spaces Society opposed it alongside the Ramblers and the Oxford Field Path Society, who we all know about, obviously. The order was upheld by the inspector, who allowed the diversion, and the Open Space Society challenged the decision in the High Court in front of Mrs. Justice Leven. I think we've got a diagram of the diversion, actually, if Rob is able to bring that up. So their property, the dotted line is how it was diverted through A to D. And the original route, thank you, Rob, the original route was going through their garden, and then that is all part of it. So what we're doing, they're going effectively round a bund to divert it. And the Open Space Society challenged the decision. Now, a diversion of a footpath is possible through an order made pursuant to Section 119 of the Highways Act and the Wildlife and Countryside Act. The order must be made in the interest of the owners and occupiers of the land over whom the footpath crosses. And Section 119 requires the following. A, the diversion to be effective must be expedient in the interests of those landowners and occupiers. The new path will not substantially be less convenient for the public as a consequence, and it's expedient to confirm the order having regard to the effect of the diversion on the public enjoyment of the path as a whole, and the effect of coming into operation of the order that that would have respect to other lands served by the existing path. So you need to consider the other lengths of the footpath. And the decision maker must clearly be satisfied that it's expedient to confirm the order. The Open Spaces Society argued the inspector erred in law because in considering the matter, she should not have taken into account the privacy of the landowners. They said that shouldn't have been taken into account because it isn't one of the features in A, B, and C that I've just read out a moment ago. And therefore, nothing else should be taken into account. Well, the High Court, Mrs. Justice Leven, who we all know as Natalie Leven, said that the Open Spaces Society had got it wrong. The inspector was right. So, Paul, you can be proud of colleagues from PINS. The inspector was right, and that privacy was legitimately to be taken into account. The legislation, Natalie Leven said, this is a point of statutory interpretation. The legislation required the 3 questions in A, B, and C to be taken into account, but that did not indicate that other relevant considerations should not be taken into account, such as privacy, and the Court of Appeal agreed entirely. And I think that's right, because, of course, everybody should have their privacy respected.
Thanks, Chris. You gave me a wicked idea halfway through that about a practical joke where next time you're away on an inquiry, we could divert a footpath through your garden. But I'm sure there's enough people watching this who could lend us a spade. Oh, dear. I did the only 2 times I've done footpath diversion inquiries. One concerned a footpath that went over the main taxiway at Southend Airport, and one that went through the firing range of an army training centre in Colchester. I kind of think only in England would you spend 4 days of your life arguing that it's not a good idea to have a footpath going over such locations in a public inquiry. But hey ho. Now Sasha isn't with us, so we may have to defer our summary of the.
Let's get on to our interview.
Let's go on to our interview. Exactly. So Mary, you're going to lead on this. So I'm going to hand over to you to introduce Mark and kick off the interview.
Well, thank you.
Make the questions. Keep the questions coming online.
Thank you very much. And so, Mark, we've already established that you're the chief executive of MOBIE, that you're a member of the Royal Town Planning General Assembly, and that you were previously head of infrastructure at PINS and previously head of planning at the EA and the RSPB, and that you would describe yourself as having a passion for the built environment. So to come to the current, explain to us, please, what MOBIE is all about, whose brainchild it was, and what your role is at MOBIE.
Okay, so the brainchild's very easy. It's George's. So George Clarke, he's got 3, I'm going to say 4 passions. He's got 3 passions. So one of them is architecture, obviously. Within that, he's really passionate about home and creating better homes and building and designing and actually manufacturing better homes. And we'll come back to that maybe later on. And then he's really passionate about young people and how we get young people into construction and the built environment. So those bring those elements together. And the 4th one, he's really passionate about the North East and Sunderland. And there is a connection. We've managed to make some connection there. And in fact, the pictures you're seeing are...
Oh, look, it's not that we're that desperate to see George, please. But
this was actually the graduation of our first students at Teesside University, which is where we started our first course, which is an MSc in Advanced Home Futures, which is sort of bringing together different designs. And then some of the pictures you're now seeing are of some of the winners of the Home of 2030 competition we ran for government as part of a consortium with REBA and the Design Council and others. And what's my role? Well, it's grandly titled Chief Executive, but there's only 3 of us at MOBIE. We do everything pretty much through partnership. So it's sort of, I can judge it more by what I've learned. So I've learned a lot about planning in my time, but since I've joined MOBIE, I've learned a lot about housing and realised how little I knew about it. I've learned a lot about education, because obviously that's the sector we're working in. A lot about engaging young people, quite a lot about how you run a charity, how you raise funds, because obviously that's part of a charity. So it's quite a combination of those different things. But that's sort of broadly what I do, along with 2 colleagues, one who's a head of design and one who's a head of education. Really what we're doing is we're running, we do 3 things: education, engagement and innovation. So the education bit is from BTECs right up to PhD in thinking about a different way of designing homes. The engagement bit is getting to young people from schools to colleges, so from 11 upwards really, around home design, the built environment, and trying to get them into careers in that area. And then the innovation bit is trying to bring a bit more invention into the home industry. I'd say it's a fairly conservative part of construction, and construction is a fairly conservative part of UK industry.
Indeed. Well, I wanted to ask you about the research and development side of things, because I understand that MOBIE is supporting modern methods of construction And so I wondered if you could just tell us what, in your view, that means for planning.
Okay, yeah. So I think we're interested in learning from manufacturing in its broadest sense. So it includes modern methods of construction, doing homes that way, but it's also how you can bring in what manufacturing considered to be fairly straightforward, continuous improvement processes into the way we build traditional buildings, because we're building them now the way we did 100 years ago. We haven't really changed dramatically, and there's a lot of things we could do to improve. So in terms of planning, in one way, there's not a lot of change because an MMC house is a house after all, but it's what's different about the process. So I think there's 2 or 3 things that planners need to take into account. One is if you're manufacturing something in a factory, and this will be anything from a volume, so what we call volumetric, which will be, comes as on the back of a lorry and gets put in place. It'll be 1 story, 2 stories, whatever it might be, or panels. There's not a lot of opportunity to change that design. So one of the things for MMC housing is that design up front is pretty locked in. So if you got to go through the planning process and then the committee planning decides, well, what we really like is to change the design of this, that is not going to be possible. There's probably something about planners engaging members earlier in discussing these schemes, because the ability to change them is just not there because of the way they're manufactured. So that's one. There's something around the construction period and also the impact of construction. So if you are going fully modular, as I said, you bring that in the back of a lorry and you could have a house assembled in days, literally days, and it will come pretty much fully ready for occupation. And that is quite interesting on small infill sites, because what's one of the problems of a small infill site? Well, it's probably all the disturbance you get of 9 to, let's say, 15 months of building and everything that goes with it. And if you tell people, actually, we'll bring this thing in, we'll crane it in, and you've probably got 4 to 5 weeks of disruption, it makes it a bit of a different issue. And then I think the final one, which is probably not applying to small scale schemes, but does to bigger ones, is if you've got Section 106 around local labour agreements. Well, clearly that doesn't work if you're bringing in panels from a factory, which is another part of the country. And there are already existing developments where there are local labour agreements, where now they're thinking of doing it through MMC. You need to think, well, what is the skills training you're going to do? Because it's not about bringing people and training them how to build the houses, because the houses are largely built. You need to assemble them, so it could be assembly skills.
So government has just announced that it's setting up an MMC task force in Wolverhampton. What do you think government is, why have they done that? What are they hoping to achieve?
So I think government is interested in modern methods for a number of reasons. One of which is numbers, because we've got a housing crisis in terms of numbers. And we know it's 300,000 per annum by the middle of this decade, and we're sort of 70,000 at best short, and sometimes 100,000 per annum short. So where's that extra housing going to come from? It's not going to come from your volume house builders. So I think they're keen about the new entrants that modern methods brings in, and it has brought in not only new entrants and foreign investment, but it's also diversification of some of the traditional builders as well. So that's one of them. I think they're interested in the speed, because obviously that's important as well. They want those units quickly. And I think this investment, and before this estimate, they was talking about the sort of northern construction corridor of modern manufacturing. It's about the levelling up agenda and what does this enable to happen? Because if it's manufacturing, actually manufacturing in places, it's why places like Sunderland are interested. This is an opportunity to use manufacturing skills which exist, maybe now underemployed in a different sector. So those are a number of the reasons why government's interested. We're quite interested that they've chosen Wolverhampton, because our other MSc is at Wolverhampton University, and that is quite a nice juxtaposition, because that's in off-site housing construction. So they didn't talk to us before they decided on Wolverhampton, but we think there might be some synergy there of some sort.
Well, so that brings me on to the sort of educational aspects that MOBIE is promoting. Tell me, how do the young people fit into MOBIE? Yeah,
so there's one interesting. So I spent a career in the built environment, as you can tell, in various different forms. And what struck me when I got to MOBIE was, I'd love to show you. I'll show you how I've got it in front of you. There's a picture of the first winners of the first MOBIE design competition. And this was in the youngest age category, so 11 to 14. And you would see in front of you a picture of 5 girls from an all-girls school in Nottingham who designed these amazing hexagonal student accommodation. And it said to me some things about the industry, which we always strive to deal with, which is we don't think we're very diverse, and we don't think we're very attractive, and nobody wants to come into the built environment in its widest sense. And I see this picture, and I see you can engage young people in the built environment. And the problem is we put a number of blockages in their way. So we put blockages around it's not very visible, bizarrely, because actually isn't the built environment one of the most visible things you see, but nobody knows how to get into it. I bet most of the people, and including yourselves who are in this call, have stumbled across the built environment, got a relative who's in the built environment. There's some way about how they found their way in. It's very rare that they actually had a career path to say, I want to go and work in this industry. So I think it's an immense opportunity to tap into those young children. And then they also have, and anybody who's got youngsters will know, amazing digital design capability from gaming and whatever else it may be. And actually that is immensely attractive. Tell a youngster that you could do this, you could have a career in this, you could be working in an industry which is pretty significant in terms of changing people's lives. We've seen that through COVID, really important about creating great places, real impact in terms of carbon. 40% of the UK's carbon emissions come from the built environment. What's not to love about that industry? The other thing I know about people in the built environment is we don't leave. Once we're in, we tend to be hooked and love it. And so therefore, it's all about how do you connect them and how do you open up that opportunity. So we do it through schools challenges, through, and obviously with George's, people who watch George are interested in architecture and the built environment. So actually connecting them into doing a challenge led by him is great. We do it through education, trying to give people a different route into thinking about a different way of building homes.
Thank you. That it sounds like a very interesting job change from your point of view.
It is. You can tell I'm loving it. It's the culmination of lots of different things. Yeah. So I've been involved in bits of education in my time and the built environment and young people and planning. And actually what I love about this is actually to bring it all together and to see. So another great story, the challenge I talked about, hopefully 30 some of those designs. The overall winner was a student from Nottingham University. The 11 to 14-year-olds who won it were actually from Nottingham Girls Academy again. And what's lovely about that is they said, well, can we have a Zoom call with the graduate who's just graduated from Nottingham, because we're going to talk about careers in built environment. Immediately they can see a role model who is now going on to professional practice in architecture, and they have a conversation where they can not only say, well, this is really interesting, but actually I can see somebody like me who is going into a career in this. There's no reason why I can't do that. So it's incredibly enabling as well.
That's a great story. Well, I'm going to open this up now to the panel, and first of all, I'd like to welcome Sasha. How are you, Sasha? You've been having while the rest of us are swanning around having a good time, you've been working really hard doing your inquiry, and it's lovely to see you.
Some of my former colleagues.
Yes, George Baird. Do you remember George?
Oh,
I know George. Yeah.
He's a lovely inspector, isn't he? So, yes. Sasha, what's your question?
Mark, are you optimistic about the future? Because as long as I've been in planning, everyone's talked about design and improving standards, and we've got arguably not that far. Do you think we will be able to get that kind of material shift to improve the quality and nature of developments that are implemented in the future?
Oh, it's a really good question, and it's a really good sort of watchword and warning that we haven't succeeded in the past. I think if the stars aren't aligned now, then they never will be. What has COVID taught us? COVID has taught us the importance of home, which is, of course, it's not just a home now, is it? It's an office, it's a school, it's a gym, it's many other things, and actually, for those of us who've been lucky enough to be in good accommodation, it has helped our experience of lockdown. It's not been brilliant, but it's been great. It's been good to be in that sort of environment. If you're a single family with one room, reading about taxi drivers or London bus drivers who come home, how can they possibly isolate if they're in one room? It's substandard accommodation. That's a real issue. I think aligned to that. So I think we appreciate that more in terms of the importance of good designers as people. And then government, I think, is increasingly interested as well. And partly that's from a point of view, they think that quite a lot of communities say no to housing because of what they see and the quality. And then I think if we're serious about the carbon agenda, then we've got to get our design better. And I actually, in terms of design, you've got aesthetics, and actually one person's beauty is another person's sort of ugly. I'm less worried about that. We've got to get it right for the users. If we design homes for users and get that right, then 9 times out of 10, the home will be right. And likewise, if we design it to minimize environmental impact, then we'll have got that right. And actually what it looks like, it's like less important than those other two things. So I am optimistic, but I'm an eternal optimist. I spent my whole career being optimistic, but I think now is the time to seize that opportunity. I think the public backing and the political backing is there as well.
Thank you. Paul, what's your question for Mark?
Yeah, Mark, great to hear your enthusiasm, frankly. My question is under the umbrella of what happens next. In part, you've answered that with the students that had the Zoom call with the students who'd gone to Germany, but just broadening it out a little bit. Obviously, MOBIE is part and parcel about educating, about consciousness raising, about getting people enthused with the built environment. I have to say, until we had the man who shall not be named, the Voldemort of this show, until we had that, I hadn't been
I'll
on
tell him that.
Yeah, please do. Tell him about my Newcastle brown ale that I was drinking for him as well. I'm saving that. But I hadn't been on the MOBIE website. I hadn't delved into the rabbit hole of looking at some of the most amazing things that students have done. So what happens next? How do you take these guys that are really enthused about the built environment and foster it into real world planning?
Yeah, so I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. What we want to do is scale everything up, really. I think we've shown a bit of what is possible. So we want to do more design challenges. We want to engage more students. We're actually kicking off a piece of work next week on the modern methods side to talk to the industry about what are the design skills they need. The other thing I hadn't appreciated, I don't think, until I came into this job, is the crisis we're about to hit in the construction profession in terms of staff and workers. The IPPR published a report beginning of last week, which sort of reaffirmed what Mark Farmer, who's one of our trustees, had said about the industry. There's 750,000 workers going to go in the next 15 years due to their age. So they're 50 or over, and only 20% of the workforce is 30 or less. And that's a ticking time bomb at a point when we need to build more homes and we want to build more infrastructure. And the classic way out of an economic problem is to do more again. I think we're going to be a point where government's saying we want more houses, we've got the money to build it, and actually we won't have the people to build it. So we've got to bring new people in, and part of that is showing them there's different ways of doing it. Another really empowering story is Ilka, who are one of the new entrants and do MMC housing. They got a factory up in Knaresborough, North Yorkshire. Their workforce, without trying, is 35% female. And why is that? Well, because it's a factory with regular shift patterns, which doesn't move around, isn't horrible to work in winter. And suddenly you're opening up construction and built environment to a whole new audience who wouldn't even think about it. So that's what we've got to get in and show people what the built environment is about. And I think my other thing is that actually we've got to join up as the built environment professions as well. Because going in and as a planner and saying being a planner at school, well, if you're not a planner, you're not a planner. If you go and say change people's lives, build great places, reduce carbon, bit of a different story, and then they'll decide if they're a planner, an architect, a quantity surveyor, or whatever else it may be. So I think as professions we need to do a bit of joining up and have a bit of a campaign. 9% of the UK population work in the built environment. That's a hell of a lot of people. Yet why didn't those school kids know that that's an option? So that's what more of that and more people to help us do it, I think is the answer.
Thank you,
Chris, what's your question, Chris?
Yeah, my question is about education, but can I just say I agree with you about the issue about the skills in the building sector. Jenny Daly, who is one of the most impressive women in our sector, working for Taylor Wimpey, she said that's what keeps her awake at night, frankly, is understanding how when all these bricklayers and other trades retire, because the younger generation don't want to be out laying bricks in February. They want laptops and lattes, it's a massive issue. So my question is, George's route into architecture was not the conventional school, sixth form and university. Lots of the people we all did, we went to university and then we went into the professions, and most of the people we work with do. What is MOBIE doing to try and reach out to people who wouldn't necessarily look at that route and go to university after sixth form and broaden the catchment and the number of people and the opportunities for those people?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. George came through the BTEC route, so he did the BTEC first. He's an uncle who turned him on to building and his interest in building, and then he went on to do an architecture degree at Newcastle. And actually, one of our ambassadors has gone exactly the same route. He's now a director of an architect's firm, quite a big one up in Sheffield, but he did BTEC as well. So we are passionate about reaching those who've got massive talent, but may not have sort of necessarily found the right way of doing it. T-levels, which are emerging, will be one of those routes. And I was talking to some T-level students this morning down in college. Actually getting them. But the thing we need to do for them is future-proof them a bit, because modern methods will not be all housing. I think Savills and McKinsey both said that maybe by the end of this decade, 20% of UK housing will be built that way. It's about 6 to 9% now. But actually, chances are you'll be working in an environment where that's happening. So we need to give them the skills to understand what they need to do. So I think it's giving them a route in. We describe it as a ladder. So BTEC is where we started, and it goes all the way up to PhD. I think it's getting them to start on that ladder, find that there is different elements of the built environment other than the traditional go on a building site and do that, albeit we need all of those trades as well. And then actually tell them you can go up that ladder. There's nothing to stop you. If you get really interested in this, you could go on and do a diploma, you could do a certificate, you could do a bachelor's, you could do a master's. There is nothing stopping you other than you and anything we put in the way. And what we want to do is get those barriers out of their way.
I suppose my point is, how do you reach them? How do you reach them when they're still at school and say, why don't you think about this?
That's why we've done the design challenges. We haven't tried to change the curriculum. We're trying to go in and say, get involved in designing the home of the future. The home of the future, that Home of 2030 was the last one we did. And encouragingly, actually, that was a government commissioned professional competition, which ran a young person's competition alongside. And it was MHCLG and BAYS and health and communities as well. Sorry, health and social care. So quite joined up in governmental terms as well. It's to get out there and just get them to sort of think about design, start thinking about your home. That's why I think that opportunity now is there, because I think people are thinking about home more and what makes a good home. So again, an opportunity to tap in when probably our senses are heightened on this issue.
I agree, and also people might be thinking about how they can improve their home and how useful it would be if they had the skills that to do it themselves. Charlie.
Thanks, Mary. I'm going to try and synthesize. There's lots of really good audience questions. We might actually have time for a second, Mary. You might want to have a look and see if there's more you want to add. But trying to sort of pull them all together in the context of what you've been saying, Mark. If there was one specific further thing that government could do to further MOBIE's agenda, and one specific further thing that the industry could do, what would those two things be?
Good question. Very good question, actually. I think on the industry side, it's the thing I hinted at. I think it's joining up and having a built environment campaign around, this is a fantastic and incredibly varied industry to work in. Just think about what it takes to build and run buildings and all the jobs that go with it. And that is everything which is obviously up front, but it's all the backroom stuff. You could be finance, you could be HR in those companies, and there's lots of them. There's something around doing that. And I think that's, to a degree, the institutes need to sort of get into that space as well. And they are increasingly doing that. So the encouragement is they are talking more as well. I think the government one is stick to your guns on design, I think there is a serious push, and I think the worst thing we could see is that being pulled away. And you need to do that because design is important, because building homes which really really look after and adaptable to people's needs is important. And actually, we've got a massive agenda to deal with sort of carbon neutrality. And we've been talking about new build. We've got 29 million homes in this country we've got to retrofit to get to zero carbon, and that is a massive thing as well. So thinking about those skills up front and who is going to be doing that, because that's another lot of skills we need. Those would probably be my two big asks. So stick to your guns on design, and let's join up as a built environment community to go into this great industry.
Well, one of our questions is asking whether you'd like to partner up with the HBF.
There are members of the HBF who will make the change. There are some who won't, and to a degree, I don't blame them, because they're making a lot of money for their shareholders in the way they do things right now, and so therefore that's great. I have more questions about whether the homes they build are great for the consumer to buy them, and that's a different question. So I don't see the change necessarily coming from the HBF, although I do think there are members of the HBF, and actually maybe as an industry, there's more attention. We saw it at Persimmon last year, maybe the year before last, with that attention around the quality of homes in terms of snagging, etc.
Yeah.
The public is becoming more aware. We talk about this new generation, they are very values and quality focused. I'm not so convinced they'll buy some of the product which is out there when they come to buy it. They'll say, well, actually, that's not what I want. I would rather hang out for something else. Having said that, shortage of supply means they may have to do something else. But I think we'll work with anybody in the industry who's willing to change. If they're willing to change, great. Yeah.
Excellent. Good answer. Now, Victoria Hills wants to know when you're going to stand to be the figurehead for the Royal RTPI president.
When I've got MOBIE on an even keel, it's keeping me pretty busy at the moment. But yeah, it's always there in the background, maybe.
Harry.
Thanks, Victoria.
Well, back to you. Thank you very much, Mark, for answering our questions. I think Chris wants to say something.
I just want to, Kate Gordon has asked a really good question, if I may say so. I don't know if the others can see that. She initially studied art, decided for her it was a poor career choice, and then moved to planning a decade later. And she's wondered whether, you could approach art colleges, because many art students may be very interested in this. So sort of reaching students doing other areas. I thought that's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's definitely an avenue to pick up. I mean, we obviously think about reskilling in relation to manufacture in terms of where our manufacturing industries, we're not doing so well, and actually how can you transfer. There's a lot of interest in the built environment from local enterprise partnerships, because they can see that there's certain sectors being hit very hard. Transport, the retail economy is going to be hit hard, and I don't think we'll recover. I think less so for the entertainment economy. That there's a lot of pent-out demand out there, which is going to come back, flooding back. But there's an opportunity to transfer. So there's a reskilling agenda as well. But that's not one I'd heard of. But thank you, Kate. I will have a think about how we might do that. And obviously, if you've got that artistic training and that sort of aesthetics, that's not a bad thing to bring into the built environment.
Mm. Thank you, Chris, for drawing that to our attention. So, and thank you again, Mark. Charlie, back to you.
Thank you, Mary. Well, and thank you, Mark. Champion of the week, I'm going to do, and I am going to nominate Rishi Sunak, author of this week's budget. Someone who, as some of you know, I've been lucky enough to have known for over 20 years, and who, regardless of politics, I might just say I can personally testify as a fundamentally decent and fantastically able person, working very, very long hours to do the right thing at a difficult time. But why is he champion of the week? Free ports. I said to somebody I'd mentioned them on the chat. The first 8 of them were announced in the budget yesterday, an announcement which, if delivered properly, and the devil's necessarily in the detail, offers some really exciting opportunities for growth and regeneration, underpinned by bespoke liberalised planning arrangements. As I said, the devil's going to be in the detail, but I think it's an encouraging indication of the important role the Treasury at least sees in the planning and development sector playing in the post-COVID, post-Brexit economic recovery and hopefully prosperity after that. So go free ports is what I say. Mary, no, it's not Mary, Chris, you're going to do the nudge of the week.
I am, and I'm afraid I'm going to nudge the CPRE, because the CPRE this afternoon, earlier today, in fact, decided to raise objections to one of my clients' proposals and submitted them on the day of the committee report, making detailed comments about ONS data. And this is the same issue that Andy Street has raised. And to do it on the day of the committee report. So nobody's got, a lot of advance notice of this. I just think that's completely inappropriate. But we got it through 5-3. So there we go. Don't just raise objections on the last day tactically. It really isn't a good idea.
They've just phoned me to ask about JR.
Yeah.
Charlie, can I just say the real champion of the week is Mark for stepping in at the very last minute.
Absolutely right.
You are
brilliant.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Honestly, it has.
And you got the prize for the most eccentric theme of the week, unquestionably, in the history of Have We Got Planning News for You.
I was going to go young people, but lawnmowers just seemed a bit more random.
I think we're going to do publication of the week in the future, and we're definitely going to do lawnmowers weekly.
Well, on that note, that's all for this week. We're looking forward to seeing you next week on Thursday, the 11th of March. I always have a sense of trepidation when I announce the next guest, because I more often than not get it wrong. But unless someone tells me otherwise, it's Jules Pipe, the Deputy Mayor of London. Hooray, I'm seeing nods, with responsibility for the new London plan. So highly topical. We're really looking forward to him. He's also, I think, the first elected Mayor of Hackney as well. So I'm particularly looking forward to hearing from him next week. So same time, same place, as always. Thank you again. All the cases and decisions are going to be on our website if they aren't already. I think they are already. And do check out MOBIE's website as well. Thank you very much. Good night and have a great weekend ahead.
Thanks, everybody.
Mark.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.